This program is underwritten by Sustainable Settings, a nonprofit organization devoted to harvesting nature's intelligence in its research and demonstration of sustainable human settlement. Sustainable Settings is supported by volunteering, the sale of our organic farm products, and your tax-deductible donation. Call 970-963-6107 and visit us on the web at www.sustainablesettings.org. Hi, this is Brook LeVan, and I'm here with Sustainable Solutions, where we interview practical visionaries. Today we're fortunate enough to have Temple Grandin here, Dr. Temple Grandin,
From Colorado State University.
From Colorado State University. And Temple's been with us this morning and helping us design our barn and cattle handling facilities. And Temple, welcome. It's
great to be here.
And I've been following your work for quite a while. You've got I'm about 59.
Okay.
So just behind you a little bit.
Yep.
And about what year did you really figure out that cows and cattle and all that was your passion?
Well, I really started getting involved in Arizona with cattle. It was early 70s, so I've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Boy, back in the bad old days, cattle handling was really awful in the 70s and 80s. You know, people are really starting to get much more interested in good animal handling, both in small operations and in big operations. In the last 10 years, I've seen some real improvements.
And what's made them change, besides your work and research and others? But
well, I think
it's economics.
In the slaughter plants, one of the things that really made them change was when big customers such as McDonald's and Wendy's made them change. Now you have to do things in a practical way. You got to use that economic buying power wisely. And out of 75 plants, and these are great big plants, only 3 had to build expensive equipment. All the others we fixed with training, non-slip flooring, lots of non-slip flooring, and these are indoor facilities, so simple changes with lighting, put up a solid panel so they don't see people walking by. It was amazing what moving a light would do to get rid of a reflection, and we were able to greatly improve the plants. Also, maintenance. Number one problem we had with stunning equipment, not causing instantaneous unconsciousness, was broken equipment. They simply were not maintaining it.
So does this have to do with, it's economics for them too?
Well, yeah.
The quality of the meat?
Quality of the meat. I mean, if animals get excited the last 5 minutes before slaughter, you're going to get tough meat and beef, and you're going to get pale, soft, watery pork. That last 5 minutes before slaughter is really critical. That needs to be really low stress from both a welfare standpoint and from a meat quality standpoint. And this applies to all different kinds of slaughter operations.
But you, was there something in your heart too, for the animals, as far as their life and their?
When I first started out, I was just horrified. Starting out in Arizona in the 70s, not really awful people treated cattle. It was just awful. And some of the very first work that I did is I noticed that they spook at a reflection, a coat on a fence, a chain hanging down, a vehicle parked next to a facility. And if you got rid of those distractions, the cattle would go through the chutes much more easily. And I was doing that with both feed yards and meat packing plants. You know, it's all about what they see. And you got to remember, this is a long time ago. And in the early 70s, this was very radical stuff. To even be thinking about what cattle are seeing. Now today, when I do my livestock handling class, I really emphasize to students the importance of being a good observer. What's your animal looking at? What are its ears doing? How can you tell if your animal is starting to get fearful and upset? Pooping, tail switching, when they get really upset, you'll see eye white. That tail switching, when there's no flies on them, that's an early warning that your animal might be getting ready to kick you. And you better heed that early warning.
Through the years, there's been a lot of adversity. You mentioned the 70s, and I wonder how much of it that you confronted was just being a woman?
Oh, being a woman in a man's world in the 70s was absolutely awful. 70s and the 80s. There's a scene in the movie where the bull testicles were put on my vehicle. That actually happened.
Huh.
I was kicked out of this feed yard because the cowboys' wives wouldn't like it. When I started out in the 70s, there were no women working out in the yards. Today, there's lots of women working in the feed yards out there with the cattle.
Yeah.
But when I started, I was a lone woman out there doing it.
Huh. Incredible. I mean, and then of course you began to analyze what they were doing, and the reception of your ideas was a challenge too, wasn't it?
Actually, I found selling the equipment was easy. That wasn't that hard. People want the thing more than they want the management. They want the magical thing that's going to solve all their problems. So I'd get the equipment and I'd get it put in, but getting people to do things right, and I'd show them how to move the cattle really calmly.
Right.
And I'd come back a year later, they'd torn stuff up and wrecked it. You know, but what kept me going is there were a few people, even in the 70s, that did things right. And what I have found on stockmanship training, if you train people in stockmanship, about 20% will go, oh, that really works. And they're the ones that would naturally be the good stock people, but they just need some training. Then you've got a whole bunch in between that needs a lot of supervision, and they need to be constantly reminded not to be yelling and screaming. And then you've got a few people that maybe should not be handling cattle. They like to see them get excited.
But at first it was your autism and that allowed you to see something different. Right?
I'm a visual thinker. When I started out in the 70s, I thought everybody was a visual thinker.
Right.
And I didn't know that most people don't think visually to the extent that I do. So it was obvious to me to look at what the cattle were seeing. So I looked at that, and when I design a piece of equipment, I can test run it in my head. I didn't know that most other people could not do that.
Yeah.
Then when I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, that was in the mid-90s, I was starting to get an idea that, yes, other people thought more verbally. For example, if I say, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I was shocked when this lady said, I just see a pointy thing like that, a vague pointy thing. I don't see a pointy thing. I see specific ones, and I can name off where they're located. Now, there's a reason for asking church steeple, because if I ask to visualize a house, most people can see their own house.
Yeah.
But when I ask you something you're less familiar with, that's when people get the more generalized images.
Not the specifics. You've said that the way your mind works is it's like Google image or something like that.
Yes, that's right.
So through the years, early on, you were logging in. You had to feed that.
Well, oh yes.
Right.
You see, in order to make visual thinking work, you want to look at lots of different things. I went to every single feed yard in Arizona and worked cattle.
Right.
Those early feed yards, I can still remember all those feed yards. And I can bring them up like short movie clips. Now, I do not remember every hotel I've been in unless it's something really weird. And I was in a hotel recently that had some really strange art in it. How about oil painting of their parking garage with an oil slick coming out of it with tire tracks?
So it has to be significant.
Yeah, that's significantly weird.
Yeah.
This was a really nice high-end hotel. That was the picture they had in one of their suites. I'm going, you gotta be kidding. I couldn't believe it. I just kept looking at it. I go, it's the stupidest thing I ever saw.
So over time, you become more articulate. It's like learning anything.
You keep
You're
learning.
feeding the images
You see,
in.
I'm a bottom-up thinker. So you learn by comparing something back to the database. And you get these kids that are getting labeled autistic, ADHD, dyslexia. They're getting too overprotected. We got to get these kids out doing stuff, like working on a farm out here. That's the best thing they could be doing. When I was 15, I was cleaning 8 horse stalls every single day, fed the horses, put them in and out of the barn, and I learned that discipline and the responsibility of having a job. And I'm seeing a lot of these kids today, much milder than I was. I had severe speech delay. I didn't talk until I was 4. I had a lot of early speech therapy. But I'm seeing kids where they're just kind of socially awkward. They're getting labeled with autism or some other label, and they're not learning basic skills. The other thing is, people that get labeled autism tend to have uneven skills.
They have what?
Uneven skills.
Okay, yeah.
And you have autism is a big spectrum. Einstein to be labeled on the autism spectrum. Last week I went to NASA. Oh, there's all kinds of people there that are on the spectrum.
Is that right?
Well, you take out some social circuits, then you get circuits to do stuff like figure out how to go to the moon.
Rocket scientists.
That's right. And then the rocket scientists have grandkids with autism, and then the rocket scientist, who's now retired, realizes that half the people he worked with were on the mild end of the autism spectrum.
Huh.
And this country's very proud of the fact that we went to the moon.
Yeah.
Well, I get worried that the kids that could do the next, Mars expedition or whatever, getting labels and they're getting addicted to video games.
Yeah.
And they're not going anywhere. They're not having a good outcome.
They're not doing anything.
Well, we got to get these kids out doing stuff.
Yeah.
And working out in a farm like this is the best thing that some of these kids could be doing.
Do you think, imagine being born 100 years ago.
100 years ago.
What might have happened to you?
Well, I had severe speech delay.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago, they put kids like me in an institution. But then you've got somewhat milder autism where there's no speech delay.
Yeah.
But the kid's just socially awkward. Well, that's the kid that might be the best person for milking the cows. Or maybe he's the person that, even further away ago, maybe he makes armor for the knights in armor.
Right.
There'd be some trade or craft he could go into. And I'm really concerned schools have taken out all the trade stuff. Art, theater, music, things that can become careers.
Yeah.
And I'd say about 20% of the socially awkward kids that get labeled with autism that had no speech delay are skilled trades where they need to be. And we have a huge shortage. Auto mechanics, welding, a lot of these highly skilled trades.
Real clear work.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. Huh. So what's current research for you?
Some of the most recent research we've been doing right now, I had a student named Connie Flurka, and she looked at individual differences on how beef cattle defend the calf out in a range situation. And there are definite individual differences. And she made a threat to the cow and the calf, which was a strange vehicle coming in like this. And some cows alert much more quickly. Some cows will call the calf, other cows don't call the calf. The latest research right now, Casey Vollmer, another one of my students, is looking at leg conformation in beef cattle. I've started observing some certain genetic lines of cattle with very bad leg conformation, and this is genetics. They'll be too straight, they might have crooked claws. These are inherited defects.
Is that from staying on a certain breed?
No, nothing. Okay, I thought you said staying on a certain surface. No.
No.
We were talking about leg conformation.
Yeah,
okay,
and I introduced the purebred or breeding.
You over-select for a single trait.
So within one breed.
Within one breed, and you over-select for any single trait. And it can be a really good trait.
Yeah.
But you go overboard on selecting for it, you're going to end up with some other bad surprise. And there seems to be certain lines of beef cattle right now, they're selecting for some really good traits, like calving ease and marbling.
Yeah.
But now starting to see some very bad legs, like crooked claw like this, too straight, where the leg is too straight.
Just like high-end Angus or something?
Some of these different kinds of cattle.
Yeah.
And these bulls are going to have difficulty walking out on pasture. There still is a need for visual appraisal. We got to start looking at what is optimal rather than going for what is maximal. And we've got to have, on extensive ranges, sound beef cattle that can walk, cows that can get out and walk, bulls that can do their job.
And that have a good predatory instincts too.
Well, you've got to, I've done work on temperament. Some of the very first work done on cattle temperament and weight gain, my student Bridget Voisinay did over 20 years ago. And we found that animals that remained calm in the squeeze chute had higher weight gain. And so for the last 20 years, people have been breeding for calmer cattle that don't jump out of the squeeze chute, that walk out of the squeeze chute slowly rather than just race out, and that makes better weight gain.
So if they're comfortable and calm.
But you see, when you're selecting for that temperament, what you're selecting for is a low startle response. Don't get scared that easily. But you don't want to overdo it, because you don't want to turn beef cattle into a bunch of Holsteins that aren't going to take care of their calf.
Right, right.
You see, again, what you need to be doing on temperament selection is I want to get rid of the crazies. But you don't want to select for the absolute calmest. Like you were asking me down at the dairy,
yeah.
What do I do if I have a really mean cow and she just kicks and kicks and kicks? I'd recommend selling her.
Selling her.
So I want to get rid of the crazies that have treed you in the pickup several times, break gates, I'm dangerous to handle.
Take responsibility and take them to the packing.
Yeah, I would
packing
take them
plant.
to the packing plant. But
Yeah.
you do not want to make all your beef cattle like a bunch of Holstein dairy cows that are so calm they're not going to defend against predators, they're not going to get out and graze, defend the calf, do the other things that beef cattle on the range need to be doing.
Yeah. So, in a more of a beef operation where the cattle actually has more flight risk in them, there's more wild in them, they have less exposure to people.
Well, you take beef cattle aren't exposed to people. You can take water buffalo, where you go down to the Philippines and kids are leading water buffaloes around with a piece of string. But when that same animal goes feral in the outback of Australia, they are wild, they are nasty. You know, so temperament's both learning and genetics. But where you'll see the genetics is when you suddenly scare it. People will say to me, oh, my animal's calm at home, he went crazy at the show. But you've got a lot of new stuff at the show that they don't see at home.
So there were two things you were talking about. There was the fear and what was the other?
Vigilance.
Huh?
Vigilance.
Vigilance, and is it fear or vigilance?
Fear and vigilance.
Yeah.
Fear and vigilance are two separate traits.
And what's the difference?
Well, vigilance says paying attention to a potential danger.
Right.
And fear is having a great big autonomic nervous system, heart racing, stress hormones going off the chart. That's the response to something that's potentially dangerous.
We have that too.
Yeah, we have the same thing.
Right. Yeah. How can we deal with that? Socialization, I guess.
Well, yeah, and you have an animal or a person that's in a constantly dangerous environment, fear's just turned on all the time.
Right.
Yeah, then you're going to get a lot of stress.
Can you see ahead where your work's going to go? I mean, can you see? Do you have future ideas that are that aren't in process yet that you want to get to it at some point?
I'm really interested in a lot of the behavior out on extensive rangeland. We need to have ranchers out on extensive rangeland because ranching done right actually improves the land.
That's right.
I've seen land where there's no grazing and the junipers have totally taken over. They've just destroyed and ruined the land. And you've got certain people that are well-intentioned but that are misguided that want to kick all the cattle off some of the public grazing lands. I think that's the worst thing that we could do.
Well, it's regenerative. Huh?
Grazing done right improves land. Now, I've seen grazing done wrong where it wrecked land.
Right.
But I've also seen it done right. And recently I went to a range management meeting where there was all kinds of good things that ranchers were doing for the land, but nobody knows about it.
This is like management intensive grazing?
It can be different types of grazing.
Mob stocking,
you
stuff
can do
like
mob
that.
stocking. It doesn't work everywhere.
Right.
See, the thing about rangeland management is it's very site specific. A mob grazing method that will work in Missouri may not work on desert rangeland. But both kinds of systems require good management.
But God put cows here for a reason.
Well, God put lots of grazing animals here.
Yeah.
Interesting thing I learned from a soil scientist. This was a very interesting talk on the origin of soils. And the very best soils going down like through Iowa, originally that land had grazing animals on it. Would have been bison in this country, would have been some other kind of animal in another country. The grazing animals, the trampling and the manuring made the soil. And it was sort of like big mob grazing. Bison would come in, mow the grass, move on, mow the grass, move on, migrate.
Were an ungulates part of that too?
Well,
maybe?
bison are ungulates.
Oh, they are?
Oh, yeah. Everything that parteth of the hood and that parteth of the hoof and cheweth of the cud, those are all ungulates. So that's going to include cattle, sheep, goats, deer, elk, bison, African antelopes. Those are all ungulates. Water buffalo. All those animals are ungulates.
So it's their work and cycles that actually built that incredible Midwestern topsoil.
That was what was built. That's the best land there is. Now that was natural grazing. You see, and if you do mob grazing, you're kind of mimicking that pattern. But again, I got to emphasize, it's very site specific. And a mob grazing system that may work in one part of the country will not work somewhere else.
Right.
You know, I'm a big fan of what Alan Savory has done on rangeland management. But unfortunately, we got a lot of people that want to just kick cattle off.
Well,
but if you get rid of the family rancher, who's going to maintain that land? Because wildlife drink out of those waters that the rancher provides too.
so there's something about scale.
Well,
Large scale, small scale.
ranching, a lot of that's done on a small scale still.
Yeah.
You know, people get on this big scale versus small scale. The thing I've found is so much depends upon the management. I have been on well-managed big and badly managed big. Well-managed small, horrible managed small.
Yeah.
I've seen outdoor pig operations where it was mud this deep and they turned the whole thing into a moonscape. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
I've also seen them done right.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough the importance of management. And the whole big fight going on between big ag and little ag needs to stop. It's all ag. I learned a long time ago, sell your own product. Don't spend most of your time selling your own product, not bashing somebody else's stuff.
Yeah. Right.
I learned that when I was very young from some salespeople.
So, coming through with your research and your innovations, was that something you learned that I'm just going to promote my thing and not or tear down somebody else along the way?
Well, fortunately, I paid attention to some good mentors. And I remember when I got invited to do my very first talk, 1974, at the American Society for Agricultural Engineering. And I got all my slides together and I showed them to this old engineer, work colleague, and I went through it and I was just saying, well, this is terrible, that's terrible. And Tom says to me, that's too negative. You're going to have to present this stuff in a more positive manner. Show something that's wrong, this is how you fix it. You've got to make this more positive. Fortunately, I followed old Tom's advice. Thank you, Tom, the engineer. Isn't that horrible? I don't remember his last name. I can see him sitting in his office. There were 3 offices in a row, and he was on the one at the end. But I followed Tom's advice on that.
Good. Tell me a little bit about your mom.
Well, Mother knew just how much to push me. She always developed my strengths. I was good at art, so she encouraged me to do lots and lots of different kinds of art. Take the thing that the kid's good at and build on it. Good at math, let's give them lots of math to do. Don't make them do the baby stuff. The other thing is, she always knew how to stretch me, just outside the comfort zone. She had me be a little party hostess when I was 7, 8 years old. The other children in the family had to do it too.
Yeah.
This was a common thing in the 50s. Teach kids social skills. Party host, party hostess, you know, greet the guests, serve the snacks. Then they had us disappear when the dinner party started. But in the beginning, you know, but that taught important social skills.
And some of that was tough at first, wasn't it?
Well, it was tough, but then I got to liking it. You know, it was kind of a grown-up thing, rise to the occasion, be grown up. Another big problem I'm seeing with a lot of kids that are different is not learning work skills. I'm seeing them too overprotected. You know, the moms are afraid to let go.
Or push
Mother
them.
had a really good idea how to push me. When I was 15, I went out to my aunt's ranch. And Mother gave me a choice. I could go to the ranch for a week, and if I didn't like it, I could come back, or I could end up staying all summer. I got out there, and I absolutely loved it. Nope, you've got to stretch. And I'm seeing too many kids that are in their teens, they don't know how to shop. Just basic things. And these are kids much milder than I was.
So, going to the ranch, you were from the East.
Yep, I was from the East. My mother got remarried when I was 14.
Yep.
Brought the ranch into the family.
Yep.
That was something lucky for me that happened. And she took advantage of the fact that my stepfather's sister had this ranch out in Arizona. That was one of the best things that ever happened. And I was one of the kids that didn't work out in a regular high school. Teasing, bullying, ended up going to a special boarding school. Yes, and they put me to work cleaning 8 horse stalls every day.
Oh,
For the
that's
first
good.
3 years I was there, all I did was ride horses, clean horse stalls, put horses in and out of the barn, feed horses. But I think Mr. Patey, the headmaster, realized I was learning really important work skills. And this is a big problem I'm seeing today. When I was 13, Mother got me a little sewing job just in the neighborhood with a freelance seamstress, hemming dresses and taking apart dresses. It's easy to set up these work skill things. A kid could walk dogs in an apartment building for some of the next door
In the
neighbors.
city.
Yeah, sure, just set it up.
Right.
Just go talk to some of the neighbors and offer up your kids' services to walk the dogs. They've got to learn that discipline and responsibility of a job outside the home. It needs to be for somebody else outside the home.
You talked about treats that your mom would give you, but she didn't give them to you. You had to earn them.
Well, Mother didn't praise me for just getting up at time in the morning. That was expected, or for good tail manners. She praised me when I did a really, really special art project. And you know, you don't praise them just for doing the routine stuff. Being on time drilled into me. You see, I can think of kids I went to college with that'd be labeled autistic today. People that own businesses. I've worked with welders that I know are on the spectrum that own metal fabrication companies now. This is what makes me crazy. So I go back and forth between the cattle world, even things like NASA, and then the autism world. Yes, it's Spot the Aspen at NASA. That's lots of fun. There's a lot of them there.
Now, you've published quite a bit. You've mentioned a couple titles.
Well, for people that are doing small farming, I'd recommend my book, Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it is a textbook and it's pricey. I don't set the prices, but it has a lot of basic things, like if you're going to slaughter an animal on the farm, what size gun you use so that it's put down with a single shot.
Where to shoot.
And it's all in there. And what would you set up for basic animal welfare, lameness scoring, body condition scoring, sores and lesions on animals, coat condition, make sure they're not full of lice. No, it's not okay to have dinner plate bald spots on cattle. That's not okay.
Right.
We've got to make sure we prevent bad from becoming normal. You know, there's a lot of dairies, they've gotten used to looking at a lot of lame cattle where that's almost looked at as being normal. They don't realize how bad it is. You got to start measuring things like lameness. Then I have my humane livestock handling book. It's especially helpful for more extensive beef operations. I'm working on a new book right now on animal behavior for small farming operations.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, we got to wrap it up, but if folks want to find you or your work, how do they do that on the internet?
They can look up Grandin.com, and a lot of my books on both autism and animals are on Amazon. Type my name into Amazon. Or if you're interested in the Humane Livestock Handling book, just type Humane Livestock Handling into Amazon. You'll find it.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Okay.
This program is underwritten by Sustainable Settings, a nonprofit organization devoted to harvesting nature's intelligence in its research and demonstration of sustainable human settlement. Sustainable Settings is supported by volunteering, the sale of our organic farm products, and your tax-deductible donation. Call 970-963-6107 and visit us on the web at www.sustainablesettings.org.